Welcome to a new episode of Two Average Joe. This is season 2, episode 1. We're going to be a little more serious on today's than usual. We're going to start talking about some true crime and kind of give a little bit of history of how that became so popular and how big it is, and kind of set it up for what we're going to do in the following weeks, because we have an actual case that most people don't know. We're going to talk about it. We'll get into that later. But as usual, we're going to do a little bit of news. And so, Mr. Baker, give me your opinion.
The only opinion I have is, Biden has this vaccine mandate, which is a horrible ripple effect across the nation, trying to force specifically healthcare workers to get vaccinated. And the United States Supreme Court struck it down primarily. I think it was 6-3 is what the nose count was on the Supreme Court justices. And I haven't read the actual opinion yet. I read a newspaper article with a little jaundiced about that. That's my source, and it's a sad source, but it was struck down basically on the same context of what they struck Whitmer's attempts at doing different things as unconstitutional and violating basically the separation of powers. A little bit more nuanced than that, but basically saying he infringed on what the Congress is supposed to do, and he, by his executive order or whatever the mandates are, forcing people to do things with it not going through the 3 different phases of government like it's supposed to, and passing. So we didn't want to get too far deep into this. It was an important decision. And I believe it's still left it where healthcare workers are still going to get hosed, because if you receive Medicare, Medicaid, whichever one it is, it's federal, they still are going to enforce the mandate against them, I believe. But it's interesting. I didn't see which way it went, conservative and liberal way as far as the Supreme Court goes. But it seems like our government is, at least parts of it are working. I'm not sure the rest of it. What is your thought on it, Joe?
Working somewhere. The thing that I have seen is I'm at the point that, in the first season of Two Average Joes, I talked about this to death. If I could just get somebody to tell me the truth. If I could get somebody to tell, and it's kind of the thing with the mandate. It's like, there's probably things that he could do, just like Whitmer in Michigan could have done, but it's all just overstated and overdone. And then you get that and you really don't know what you have. We got people on their 14th jab. I'm at the point now that I look at it all almost as if you had told the truth from the beginning, we wouldn't have been there.
True.
They were just more interested in how this was Donald Trump's fault, and more interested in burning down the entire country with it, as opposed to trying to be honest about what happened. I think if people had been honest from the beginning, and see, now you have to backpedal because you go, this is Donald Trump's fault. It's all going to be better for Joe Biden. Well, that answer is no. It hasn't been better. It hasn't been better. He's whatever. I'm not going to get lost on him, but, it hasn't been better. So we've just gone into this vicious cycle where I'm at the point where it's like, no matter what they talk about it, I said, I wish somebody had told me the truth.
Right.
You got it there. We're going to go into true crime, and there'll be a little bit of news before every issue. And like I said, this is season 2, episode 1. I don't think you can talk about the true crime genre, though, without giving people who are listening to us for the first time talking about this a little bit of a background. There is some intrigue to me because, we aren't the only podcast doing true crime. Okay. And even before that, I'm pretty sure that ID channel was pretty popular. Okay. I'm pretty sure that was, and all the movies and everything. But I also think there's this belief system, if I could say it, where people believe that everything is new. That's one of the great things about Western culture, is that everything's new every 5 minutes. Okay. And everything's new and everything's better and everything's bigger and everything's better. Right. But in reality, there are some things that have always been there. And going back into what was probably in the 1800s with police gazettes, okay? And magazines about crime have always been there. The comic book industry really tagged into that long before superheroes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for a lot of people now with Marvel being so big and they think of comic books, it's always like superheroes. But in actuality, the comic book industry was big with war comics and Westerns and true crime and all sorts of romance, everything. And you had all of that. Mm-hmm. And crime was always big. And early on and all the way until the era of magazine died, you pretty much could walk into any magazine store and get what they called detective magazines. Now, they were shady, okay? Yeah. Shady and poorly written.
Lots of naked women on the front covers.
Yeah, or semi-naked. Yeah.
Scantily clad.
Scantily clad, right? And interesting stories that, I'm pretty sure that wasn't true, but they're horrible to read. I mean, they're not.
Yeah, they were horribly written.
Yeah, they're, let's be honest. I mean, it wasn't high literature, but don't think those magazines weren't selling. And if you're, inclined to do that, eBay's still selling them. And I actually am trying to create a situation where I can write an article or a couple of articles on it, because I am fascinated with the subgenre of true crime. Mm-hmm. It's just that while trying to read them, it's just, they're horrible. They're just horrible. Okay. But then you go, and something magically happened in the mid-late 60s, and it was probably the least likely person you will ever know to have done a true crime book, and it was Truman Capote.
Yes.
And Truman Capote, who had written Breakfast at Tiffany's, okay? But by the way, go on, and watch that movie. It is not a true crime, okay? And Capote was a writer, and he was a very popular person and very successful. He would have been the last person I think people would have pointed out and go, that guy's he's gonna write the book. Right. He's going to legitimize true crime. He's going to make the true crime genre huge. And I think I don't think you can discuss why people are interested in it, why people are fascinated in it, why is it important, without mentioning In Cold Blood with Truman Capote.
Right.
Now, for those people that like to follow Turner classic movies, it's playing right now. You might want to go watch it. Okay. Yes. It's a phenomenal movie. I've read the book a couple of times. It's been a while since I've read it. Everything I read, they tried to stay pretty true to the book with Capote. Okay. But it is an interesting development because a guy who you would have never thought would have written it wrote it. And it created a completely different genre. And here's what's interesting. We're getting ready to talk about it, and you and I are a certain age, okay? I mentioned, and this is how big that book was. The second I said In Cold Blood, you knew exactly what I was like. It's just that phenomenal. You sent an article to me, and it'll be in a link below. Tell me what you thought was the most interesting part of Capote talking about.
Capote, what I didn't realize was Capote and Harper Lee were childhood friends down in Alabama, evidently.
They were besties.
I think they met when they were 4 or something like that, right?
Right.
And they were lifelong friends. And Harper Lee, as most people will know, wrote To Kill a Mockingbird, right?
Yes.
And that was the only book until I think she published post-death another version of To Kill a Mockingbird or some.
There was a lot of controversy around it.
Right. So that to me was really, really fascinating. And then also that Capote had some kind of aversion towards one of the killers, which was Perry. It seemed more intellectual.
Yeah. The most violent, Perry Smith. Yeah.
He's the one who killed everybody, I believe. 4 people were in that home. And I watched, Joe and I talked before the episodes, and he gave me homework, and I was to, watch In Cold Blood. and I caught part of it. And then I watched Capote because I had forgotten. I had thought I read a long article in Vanity Fair, and I couldn't find it. What I found, I think, was a New York Times article.
Right. This is excellent.
It was really excellent. And then I found another one by George Plimpton, which I should send you. But
yes.
And so I watched the Capote thing, and in the Capote movie, he did a reading before the book was published while the two killers were still alive. And what was read was very literate. And that was kind of what the selling point was. Was this the first time that true crime was ever taught in a literary fashion? Right? So I instead went to Audible and downloaded the book, and I'm a couple hours in. So I didn't want to go watch the movie because usually the movie's not as good as the book.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
But this movie goes, it's very.
Yeah. So the fascinating part that I had is one, the friendship with Harper Lee, and that when Harper Lee published To Kill a Mockingbird, it was far more successful than his books or whatever. And it crushed him. And I think it ruined their friendship. Of course, I think his drinking and all that other stuff might have ruined.
Yes. And we'll get to that.
Right. But then also the part about he became very close to Perry. And in the movie, I'm not sure whether the movie Capote, I'm not sure whether it's true, but he related to Perry because they had a similar childhood. And Joe and I had talked about criminality, and usually criminals don't do something just out of the blue. They are, and Joe as former chief of police and me as an attorney, we see or saw it every day. And what do you think about that, Joe? We had talked about it, and I'm not sure how deep we wanted to go into it today.
Yeah, I think we should, because one of the things, and I don't want to go down the rabbit hole with a bunch of other criminals, I think it's interesting that Capote has zero law enforcement and law experience, period. Doesn't know anything about it. But because of just the fact of his own depth or his ability to understand people, he immediately knew that there was a story there. That it's not saying that at the end of the day, both of them didn't need to hang. Okay.
Right.
He didn't get into that. He didn't go there like, oh, and this poor guy didn't need to hang, but to create a story so you understood why this happened. Mm-hmm. And I think, and we have discussed this 100 times, if we haven't discussed it once, it might have been 1,000,000 times, is people seem to forget that. They forget that sometimes, there's people that just do things out of the blue. I understand that. But for the most time, we create a lot of this.
Yes.
Society creates a lot of this. Culture creates a lot of this. The way people are raised, if that's what you want to call it, creates a lot of this.
Right.
And I don't want to go down too many rabbit holes, but we will later, but I don't want to do it now. I want to stay focused on these two guys.
Mm-hmm.
Is I think that was also a time where in especially if you look at Wild West kind of things, this guy's a horrible killer and he's sinister and he's bad, he kills 50 men. And then the Jack the Ripper guy, he was terrorizing and killing. I think that also you had Capote being, all of that's true. You never said that wasn't true. Right. Let me tell you a side story. And I think that made difference too, because I do think that gets lost. I can still remember being in training where people are trying to explain, and you would still have some sort of, guy at police. And I mean, I'm not, putting him down, but, this isn't great thinking. Well, does it really matter why he did it? He did it and we arrest him. I'm like, dude, yeah, that's great. That's great. Don't ever train anybody and just do your job. Because you don't have any concept of what we're doing. Just follow connect the dots.
Yeah.
Do your package and you'll be fine. But don't try to train anybody. Because what people were really trying to say is we're creating some of these things. So at the end of the day, if you could intervene in certain things, maybe it'll be there, or to understand how we got there.
Yeah.
And that's a big part for the whole justice system.
Yeah, I mean, if we don't understand that, and that's where, training is so important to police. I mean, recidivism is the issue, right? It's not why did they do whatever the heck they did.
Right.
It's how do we keep them from one, either doing it again or getting worse and doing worse.
Right.
And
I'll tell you something too that I always thought that was like when people said that they missed the boat. I understand the let's let crime come to us concept, because if you do law enforcement, anybody's watching this will know, you're driven by that radio. I'm sorry. Okay.
Mhm.
They can talk all the smack they want. We're driven by that radio, and we go to a lot of calls. It's like we're solving this murder after he's murdered. That's just the way that works. That's 100% of the time, right?
Right.
We have solved no murders before somebody was murdered.
Might have stopped the murder though.
We can stop and prevent, but we did not investigate and arrest. Okay, that's the way it works. You do a lot of things reactionary. But it was like, I always thought it was good to let people know, whether it's citizens, police officers, whatever. There's just some things that happen, and this world turns a little bit on its ear. Reading the article that you sent me, which was, by the way, was the PLIMPTON article.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, was that they were going to try to kill some other people. It just fell through.
Right.
Because once you go there, you go there. There was a great quote in that article from Capote that says, one of the way Perry Smith intimidated the Richard, I think it's like Wild Bill Hickok. So it's like Richard Hickok, right?
Mm-hmm.
Was by telling him he had already killed some people. Because that made it to him in his mind, well, once I killed somebody, I got nothing to lose.
Right.
Well, unfortunately, there's a lot of people that actually function like that. Once they got nothing to lose. You can't go back. So you have all of that, and I thought that was very, very interesting. In just a little bit of the book that you've been listening to, give me a little bit of your brief view of that.
The very beginning is very well written. I mean, it is literary. I mean, he talks about the town, and I forget what, I think it was called Holcomb or something like that. And it's a small Kansas town. There's only like 250 people in it. The guy was wealthy. I mean, they really go into the family members that were killed. The mother had some mental health issues. The father was uber wealthy, or not uber wealthy, but was successful. They were all religious. They had a young daughter that was dating. He goes really in depth into, so the family. I mean, I don't know if you remember the book, but there.
Yeah. I mean, he goes, he creates something for the Clutters, which is their name.
Yes.
And he creates them because nobody would have known who the Clutters were outside of that town.
Yeah, you and I have talked about it as the victims get lost in most.
Yeah, they do, 100%.
Right. And so they're really, I think the daughter is making pie with a neighbor or something like that right now, or shortly a little while ago when I'm listening to it on Audible. So,
yeah,
but
I like it.
But you've got a good picture of what this family is like, and they are, of course, salt of the earth, right? Or damn close to it.
Right.
So the tragedy is, or the suspense or the tragedy is building, because I know, from, I watched In Cold Blood years ago.
Right.
I know how the story ends, and it isn't
good. Yeah.
It's not good for them. And he kind of tips it off. He says, well, and he says all this good stuff that the father is doing. Little did he know that this was going to be his last day on earth, basically.
Right. Right. I think it was interesting, and I remember reading the book, and I remember I watched the movie last night. Okay, that they put some emphasis on their humanity.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think that was very, very interesting because, in fairness, I think that, and I'm talking about everyday crime, I do think the victim is shafted.
Yeah.
I think they're put on the back burner. And we're not talking a helter-skelter situation where, they were all famous, right? I mean, we're talking regular, down-to-earth people. And I think he did a good job of that. And I think that's one of the things that, as true crime grew, focusing on the victims did become more realistic, which it should be.
Yeah.
And I think he did a wonderful job on that, but I think it also created this second wave, which is really kind of where we're going on this second wave.
Mm-hmm.
People want to know about crime. You know, I remember, and this is following me here because I'm going to go a little circular, but I'm going to get back to the point. Somebody once pointed out to me that sports is overrepresented. Like if you take the paper, there's an entire section on sports. There's a very good chance that if you're watching the news, many people are reading about sports way more than they are what's happening in Russia and the Ukraine.
Right.
Okay. And there is a truth to that. Okay. It's an undeniable fact that we have that disproportionate. The thing of it is, and I don't want to call it disproportionate because I think you do need to know about crime. I do think people have a fascination with crime.
Yeah.
I think they have a fascination with it being part of life that nobody talks about. The only problem is, and I don't think it's bad, but it's kind of, let me follow it on as we go with this. It's why we're going to capture the case that we're going to talk about.
Right.
Because it's very, very easy to get interested into the gore side of it. But the reality is there are victims. And in our case, there's a person who we believe that was found guilty, and we'll go into more detail, who did not kill that person. You and I both believe that, so we're going to be straight up.
That is true. And we also are going to do an in-depth study of the victims as best as we can. We started a book, I don't know how long ago, a while ago.
But we definitely need to do that, and we really need to focus on it. And, you know, next week or when we get together and our next time that we're together, we're definitely going to talk about how that sets up, that it is involved in our culture and how our culture does things does matter.
Yeah, it does.
And that's going to be the real crux on a lot of different things. So there's a good part to it. The fascination sometimes can get disproportionate.
Mm-hmm.
But I think people need to know it. I think they need to know the victims. I think they need to know that it's out there in the culture. One of the links I'm going to have is from one of my other websites, and it's called Why Monsters Matter. Because we like monsters, whether they're real or imagined. Okay. We, to give you a good example, everybody loves the Joker movie, Joker and Batman. Now, he is the bad guy, right? It's like I'm talking a little bit off my head because I can't remember the actor's name, but he was on TV and he goes, "You do know that Walt on Breaking Bad?" He goes, "You do know he's the bad guy."
Right.
Everybody's rooting for Walt on Breaking Bad, right?
Right.
And I can't remember the actor. He's the one that played his brother-in-law. That was the police. And he goes, y'all do realize he's the bad guy, right?
Similar to Sopranos, right?
Yeah, they're the bad guys, right? We're fascinated with it, and it's and like I said, there'll be a link in there about Monsters Matter, and it really does. And I wrote it when I was doing some things with when I was teaching school. Mm-hmm. It came to my mind because they wanted the high schoolers wanted to talk about Monsters Matter, and it's not that I'm against that because it does play a place in our culture, okay, and it does play a place in our psyche. Mm-hmm. Okay, because stories about the boogeyman have always been. Okay, but if it's not done correctly, then I just think it becomes grotesque. And I think we do want to focus on it, but you want to focus on real situations, real things, how the courts handle things, that there are victims. Okay, lives are shattered. Okay, things happen. And so when we go into this one, and kind of, you're probably very much, you're a lot more closer to this than I am. Give a little bit of background on what was happening back then and how Gary got involved.
It's a long story and probably takes several episodes, but I was brought into a case. I owned a small piece of a PR firm about, 10 years ago, 12 maybe. And we got a call from a family, and it was a family of Gary Leiterman. And Gary had been convicted in, I believe it was 05 or 06, of a murder from 1969. Okay. And he wanted the PR firm. It happened to be up on appeal. because he was sitting in Jackson prison. I think it was Jackson, for a murder. And he wanted, his family wanted some PR for the Michigan Supreme Court appeal that he had filed. And he was unsuccessful, of course. And he actually ended up dying in prison a couple of years ago on the 4th of July. And I think, Joe, did you write something for one of your online things about that? I can't remember.
We wrote a little bit. I don't think we wrote it. We did not put it online yet.
Oh, gotcha.
But that's coming. That's coming. We're going to do that as we build our episodes. That's a tease, folks, because, and I hate to use that word because Gary was a good person. He really was. There was mistakes made. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not going to say he was perfect, but when we get done telling you about this case, you're just going to be wondering how it got there.
Yeah. But the bigger, more fascinating part is this occurred in Ann Arbor and the Ypsilanti area. There was a series of serial killings, 6 or 7, could be up to 30 across the nation.
Yeah, or
more. Based on what they believe or the law enforcement did or does, a guy named John Norman Collins. And
still alive, by the way.
He is still alive. I think he's up in Marquette prison. But as Joe always says, there was something that happened in 69 that kind of knocked Mr. Collins off of the hit parade, and he would probably
be right there.
Okay.
This case that he's talking about, and we're not kidding you, because when you follow us, you're going to see how big it is. He would be as big. Just trust me on this one. He would have been as big as Bundy. But something very interesting happened in the summer of 69.
Something did happen. Not only what we landed on the moon, a lot of things happened in 69, but the one thing happened is the Manson murders.
Yeah, no doubt about that.
Yeah, and so Charlie Manson knocked this, I believe, and Mr. Collins out of the realm of super serial killers that he doesn't get a lot of play. There were books written. It was called The Michigan Murders, and I can't remember the guy who wrote it. Mm-hmm. There's been about 5 or 6 books written about him, but none about Gary Leiterman, which is interesting because Gary is the odd man out. Supposedly he was a copycat killer when there was nothing to copycat.
Right. And he was a serial killer with brutality, though he showed nothing before or after. So
yeah,
that's going to be it's going to take several episodes to deal with that. So one of the things that we have to do, and everybody has to keep in mind, is this is not something that's going to be discussed in 45 minutes.
Yeah, right.
This is not something that's discussed in an hour. It is a prolonged situation. And as we said and mentioned a couple of times, we are not going to blow by the victims.
All right.
That's not going to happen. We're not going to blow by victims. We're not going to sit around and shortchange victims. So we hope that you can stick around. We wanted season 2 to be different. We appreciate all the support we got out of season 1. But I think that there's a point where we from the beginning, we wanted to do this. This is one of our original ideas that we really wanted to do. So it's time to start it. I want to say this, that when we get in ready to do our next episode, we're going to really set that standard for what 1969 was.
Yeah.
For our younger viewers, okay, it's kind of hard to explain the insanity because people go, it's crazy now, and it is. 1969 was crazy. Okay. I mean, we were kind of coming apart at the seams. The crime with Charles Manson and the Manson family just swept everything else out of it.
Yeah.
But I honestly believe this because Gary's situation came from a string of murders that people really weren't familiar with. I think it was a lot easier to attach that to him.
Yeah.
If this had been well known that he did it and every I had been dotted, every T crossed, it was not. We'll get into that more. It left some things open that actually caused this. If everybody had descended on Ann Arbor, Michigan in 1969, And those people that were doing the case had to literally feel the pressure of doing everything right. It could have been a really different. We'll discuss that later, and we'll get more into that. So there you go, people. Let's get ready. Links will be in here. We're glad to be back. I hope everybody's having a happy new year. And Mr. Baker, is there anything else you want to say?
Yeah, I had two things. One is that there's going to be things that you're not going to hear anywhere else, because I went and saw Gary, I don't know how many times while he was in prison. And there's just one thing, because Christmas season just came and went. He would hand draw with a pencil a Christmas tree. He did this every year while he was in prison. He sent it to me every single year. And he would send me a recipe that he would cut out of a book. Okay. And he would thank me for my help. And he would send me this recipe. And I'm like, every time I went in the room with him, I'm like, man, either this guy is a serial killer or he is an innocent man. I'm disturbed as hell by either way, right?
No, it's there. And I think as our listeners and viewers see, you're going to see that for him to morph into this thing for one night and then come back is very. I
mean, and that's just a small, tiny indication of his character. I mean, I don't know how many serial killers send out recipes for bundt cake, and hand do a Christmas card. Okay, I'm just saying that, and there's a lot of that, and I, as an attorney, I have to sit across the desk from many people that have been charged with serious crimes, horrendous crimes, and I don't make a judgment as to whether they're innocent or guilty. Usually, the facts play out. And the evidence does, and I can determine that. But the jury has to decide. Unfortunately, there was a bunch of missteps made in Gary's case, and he ended up spending life in prison for something that he most likely did not do. So that's just a tickler for that.
Yeah.
And then one more thing, which was to circle back to Truman Capote. Mm-hmm. He never wrote another book of any substance. Okay.
No.
And in his epigraph, or I forget what they call it. What's the inscription where you write like a quote in the beginning of your book? Is it an epigraph? I think it is.
Apparently we missed that day in college. Go ahead. Or high school.
Right. But anyway, so it's in frickin' French, right? But yeah, I think it's in that PLIMPTON article. But what he wrote was, more tears are shed for prayers that are answered than for prayers that aren't. And that was very telling, because he never wrote, he just slid into, Joe and I talked about it before, he slid into doing late night TV as a guest. Yeah, he was alcoholism, and he actually died at Joe and I, well, Joe's 60, I'm 59. He died at 59 of a chronic liver failure, I think it was.
A very young man when that happened, for sure.
Yeah, we are very young, right?
One interesting thing about Capote, and we talked about it before, and I'm glad you brought it up before we went out here. Okay. My generation, Robert's generation, he was just the guy that was on the Johnny Carson show.
That's exactly right. I didn't know he was a literary, I don't know, he was a genius.
They said it, but I didn't know it. They talked about it. I mean, I got to Cold Blood later, but I'm talking about, you're watching Johnny Carson, you're like, okay, this guy's interesting. Mm-hmm. Who else fell in that was Orson Welles, maybe one of the greatest actors, producers, directors, writers, everything, right? And he ended his life sitting on there talking to Johnny Carson. It's interesting.
Right.
It's very interesting that it happened. Very interesting that he never wrote another novel.
Exactly.
A few articles tops. I mean, really crazy. So something to think about. But look, this is going to take a while, but I think you're going to be interested in every one of them. We are not blowing over the victims. That is not good.
Yeah. And before we go, and Joe usually says it, maybe we haven't said it yet, but make sure you click the like button, subscribe, do whatever you need to do, because we're probably, with the stuff we're talking about in the jab, we hurt ourselves on the algorithm again.
Again.
Seems to be our lot in life, right?
That's right. So go ahead and do that for us. So we'll see you next week, and we'll grow on this. We appreciate it. So everybody, take it easy. Have a good day, and
see you.
Bye-bye.